Rome, 47 CE, Imperial Palace. Imagine standing in a room filled with senators, nobles, the most powerful men in the empire, all watching in silence as the Empress of Rome competes in a grotesque wager. This isn't a political debate. This isn't a religious ceremony. It's a sexual endurance contest. In front of them, Scylla, Rome's most famous prostitute, has just serviced 25 men consecutively, all night long, until exhaustion finally defeats her. She collapses at dawn. Everyone believes the contest is over, but Empress Messalina does not stop. She continues. 30 men, 35, until there are literally no more volunteers left. Until the sun rises completely and the room falls into absolute silence. The Empress of Rome has just won a competition against the most experienced professional courtesan in the empire, in public, in front of senators. And the worst part, this was not an act of madness. It was calculated power. Today, I'm going to tell you how Messalina, a 15-year-old girl married to Emperor Claudius, became the most dangerous woman in Rome. Not with armies, with sexual blackmail, with systematic humiliation, with a hidden empire of shame that nearly destroyed Rome from within. Because what she did does not appear in history books. They deliberately erased it. I'm Crown and Dagger. And here, history is told without filters. Only the truth that Rome tried to erase. Why do teachers teach you about emperors, but never about the empresses who controlled those emperors? Because the truth is too disturbing. Because sex was a political weapon, more powerful than any Roman legion. Every week, Crown and Dagger unearths the stories the world prefers to forget. If you want the truth without censorship, hit like and subscribe, because what's coming is much more brutal than that contest. That was just her rehearsal. To understand how Messalina wielded power through shame, you first need to understand the world she entered. Rome, 38 CE, the greatest empire in human history. 60 million people under Roman control, from Britain to Mesopotamia, from Germania to Egypt. And at its center, on the Palatine Hill, stood the Imperial Palace, where gods walked among men, where a single word could mean life or death for millions. That year, a 15-year-old girl named Valeria Messalina walked through those palace doors. She was beautiful, golden hair, pale skin, noble blood running through her veins, descendant of Mark Antony himself. She was married to Claudius, a 48-year-old man with a limp, a stutter, and a body that was failing him. He had just become emperor after his nephew, Caligula's assassination, left Rome traumatized and desperate for stability. The Senate praised the match, a young bride to produce heirs, noble blood to legitimize the dynasty, fertility and virtue to restore dignity to the throne still scarred by Caligula's madness. Rome celebrated in the streets. This was supposed to be a solution. But here's what they didn't understand about Messalina. She had been raised in a world where women had no power, where your body, your future, your very existence belonged to men. Your father chose your husband. Your husband owned your life. The state controlled your virtue. For a Roman woman of her status, there was only one path: marriage, children, silence, and death. Unless you found another way. Rome's power structure in the 1st century CE was built on honor. Your dignitas, your public reputation, was worth more than your life. Losing face meant social death. Shame was worse than execution. Senators spent their entire careers building reputations. One scandal could destroy generations of family prestige. One rumor could end political futures. One public humiliation could obliterate everything. And Messalina understood something that male emperors before her had not. That honor wasn't strength, it was vulnerability. Because the more you had to lose, the easier you were to control. The Roman system gave her 3 advantages. First, as empress, she was untouchable. Criticizing her meant treason. Speaking against her meant death. The moment she married Claudius, she gained immunity. Second, women were underestimated. No one suspected a young bride could be dangerous. They saw beauty in youth and assumed innocence. By the time they realized their mistake, she already owned their secrets. Third, sexual shame was absolute. In Rome, being publicly humiliated sexually was the ultimate degradation. Men would rather die than have their sexual failures exposed. Women would rather vanish than have their virtue questioned. Messalina weaponized all three. Within 4 years of her marriage, Messalina had transformed the Roman court into something unrecognizable. Ancient records suggest she controlled the appointments of at least 30 governors across the empire. Not official channels, through blackmail. She influenced the decisions of over 200 senatorial families, not through law, through shame. She accumulated wealth equivalent to what historians estimate at 100 million sesterces. That's roughly $100 million in modern value. Not from taxes or inheritance, from extortion. And she did all of this before turning 20 years old. But the numbers don't capture the horror of how she did it. The whispers started in the darkest corners of Rome. In the tenements of the Subura district, in the servants' quarters of noble homes, in the barracks where soldiers drank cheap wine and spoke truths they'd never utter in daylight. Word spread of an empress who slipped from the palace at night, not to visit a secret lover, not to pray at a shrine, but to disappear entirely into another life. She moved through Rome's red light district like a ghost, her face hidden beneath cheap makeup and grease, deliberately applied to obscure her features. Her body offered in the very brothels that Rome's elite pretended didn't exist. She took money for her services. She gave no special treatment. She demanded no recognition. She competed directly with professional prostitutes. And those who somehow recognized her faced a choice, silence or ruin. But this wasn't desperation. It wasn't poverty or madness or the thrashing of a caged woman seeking escape. It was something colder, something calculated. She was exploring the forbidden with the precision of a hunter stalking prey. She had discovered the erotic power of contradiction. The thrill didn't come from the acts themselves. It came from the audacity, from knowing that senators she would greet with perfect courtesy tomorrow had been in her presence tonight and didn't know it. The brothel was her training ground, a place to learn men's weaknesses, to understand desire, to study shame. By 42 CE, Messalina had constructed what historians would later call an imperial brothel, disguised as an elegant aristocratic residence near the Campus Martius. From the outside, it looked like any wealthy Roman's villa. Marble columns, beautiful gardens, servants in fine clothing. Inside, it was a theatre of degradation. Aristocratic women were forced to serve there under threat of ruin. Not common prostitutes, daughters of senators, wives of generals, women whose families would be destroyed if they refused. They were brought to the villa under false pretenses, told they were attending private dinners, social gatherings, religious ceremonies. Only when they arrived did they discover the truth. Messalina would be there, watching, observing, taking notes, recording everything. Senators and generals arrived the same way, believing they were attending elegant entertainments, political discussions, private meetings. Instead, they found themselves in scenarios designed to compromise them absolutely. Here's how it worked. A senator would receive an invitation, an honor to dine with the empress he couldn't refuse. Without appearing disloyal, he would arrive with his wife. The evening would begin normally. Wine, conversation, music. Then gradually, the atmosphere would shift. Guards would appear. Doors would lock. The senator would realize too late that this wasn't a dinner. It was a trap. His wife would be taken to another room. He would be forced to watch as she was unveiled before other nobles. Her shame became his shame. Her humiliation became his degradation. Or sometimes, it was the reverse. The senator himself would be stripped of his toga, the symbol of his rank, forced into grotesque displays before rivals who would later exploit that disgrace. Every trembling moment was recorded. Every whispered plea was documented. Every act of submission was preserved. And then they would be allowed to leave, to return home, to pretend nothing had happened. But Messalina owned them now. The next time she needed a favor, they would comply. The next time she wanted a governorship awarded to her ally, they would vote correctly. The next time she demanded wealth, they would pay, because the alternative was exposure, and exposure meant destruction. But the villa was just the beginning. What she did inside the palace itself was far worse. Pause for a second. Do you think Messalina was a victim of a system that gave women no power, or was she a monster who weaponized the only tool available to her? Leave it in the comments, because what comes next is going to change your answer completely. By the early 40s CE, Claudius's court had transformed into something unrecognizable. The banquets no longer celebrated military victories or policy achievements. They became theatre, grotesque, suffocating theatre, where the rules of Roman society were inverted and weaponized. Silk draped the couches. Wine flowed in rivers, imported from the distant provinces, so expensive that a single cup cost what a labourer earned in months. Golden platters overflowed with delicacies, but the true spectacle was human degradation. Messalina's banquets operated on a simple principle. Everyone in the room was equally compromised. Senators found themselves summoned under pretense of honor. Only when they arrived did they realize they'd been lured into chambers where their fears were already known, where the Empress had collected intelligence on their weaknesses. Generals stood before her, stripped not just of armor but of dignity, before rivals who whispered their secrets, ensuring that humiliation would follow them home. Young men from the best families found themselves in scenarios they couldn't explain, couldn't escape, and couldn't survive socially if exposed. Picture this. You're a Roman senator. You've been summoned to the palace. You arrive with your wife. The evening begins with music. Dancers perform. Wine is served. Then Messalina signals. Your wife is led away. You watch as she disappears behind a curtain. And then you hear her voice, her cries, while you sit there, surrounded by other senators who are watching you, watching your reaction, watching you do nothing. Because if you stand up, if you protest, if you even frown, you're executed. Right there. So you sit, you drink your wine, you pretend you don't hear anything. And when your wife returns 30 minutes later, with haunted eyes that won't meet your gaze, you take her hand and you leave in silence, because that's the only way to survive. One of these victims had a name, Sulpicia Praetextata. According to administrative tablets preserved in the Vatican archives, Sulpicia was the wife of Senator Publius Valerius Asiaticus. She was 24 years old, 2 children, from a noble family that had served Rome for 4 generations. One night in August 44 CE, Messalina summoned her to the palace. What happened that night was recorded in the private letters of Seneca, who was present. The Empress made the senator's wife perform acts that cannot be written, while her husband sat among us, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to even close his eyes because we were all watching him. 3 months later, Publius Valerius Asiaticus was dead. Official records say he died of illness. But Tacitus wrote the truth. He took his own life because the Empress had taken his honor first. His wife Sulpicia vanished from all records after that night. Some historians believe she was killed. Others think she fled Rome. But her name disappeared completely from history, as if she had never existed. That's what Messalina did. She didn't just humiliate people, she erased them. The Empress orchestrated these events like a conductor leading an orchestra. Senators were paired deliberately with enemies, made to watch each other degrade themselves. Generals were forced into grotesque contests designed to strip them of authority. Noble wives were unveiled before roaring circles of the elite, their bodies on display, their shame manufactured, watched, and recorded. refusal